know you're out there. I can feel you now. I know that you're afraid. You're afraid of us. You're afraid of change.
It is a mercy that the human mind is unable to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity. But someday, the piecing together of disjointed bits of information and knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and reveal to mankind how frightful is our position therein, and we shall either go mad or flee into the blessed oblivion of a new dark age.
What is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about what you can feel, what you can smell, what you can taste and see, then real is simply electrical signals interpreted by your brain.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, this world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's, and yet as mortal as his own. We know now that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water.
I didn't come here to tell you how this is going to end. I came here to tell you how it's going to begin. I'm going to hang up this phone, and then I'm going to show these people what you don't want them to see. I'm going to show them a world without you. A world without rules and controls, without borders or boundaries. A world where anything is possible.
At the end of the day, each one of us is a unique person. As Alan Moore said, each of us has a different spiritual constitution. So what works for you might not work for me.
With infinite complacence, people went to and fro over the earth about their little affairs, serene in the assurance of their dominion over this small, spinning fragment of solar driftwood, which by chance or design, man has inherited out of the dark mystery of time and space.
Write your own gospel, live your own myth.
Welcome to the real world.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural. Today I'm going to begin the forethought with a note, and that note is, the views and opinions expressed by our guests are their own, and they may not necessarily reflect my personal beliefs or the views of this podcast. Here at Truth and Shadow, we encourage open dialogue and the exploration of diverse perspectives. But as always, I urge you to listen and critically draw your own conclusions. I call this podcast Truth and Shadow because the more the light reveals the things that are in shadow, the more truth seems to come to light. And sometimes it's easier to simply say truth in shadow. That Fox Mulder might have been right when he said in the X-Files, the truth is out there. But what if the truth isn't what we think it is? What if reality as we know it is a carefully constructed illusion, a simulation created to keep us blind to the actual nature of our existence? This idea isn't merely the stuff of science fiction. It echoes ancient Gnostic beliefs that the world is a deceptive construct, a prison for the soul created by a false god, the demiurge. It's in Gnostic thought that the material world is a flawed and corrupted shadow of a higher divine reality, that the true God, the source of all light and knowledge, exists beyond this illusion, beyond the grasp of the physical senses. Those who see through the illusion are the awakened ones, the so-called Gnostics, who seek knowledge, gnosis, to transcend the material world and reunite with the divine. If we fast forward from ancient times to the 21st century, we'll find ourselves grappling with a modern iteration of an ancient worldview called the simulation hypothesis. It's proposed by philosophers and scientists alike, and this theory suggests that our reality is nothing more than a highly sophisticated computer simulation, a digital construct designed to mimic a true reality that lies just beyond our reach. Think the Matrix. What if the architects of our universe are not kind and caring creators, but cold, calculating programmers? What if the glitches we encounter, those moments of deja vu, the unexplained phenomena, synchronicities, what if they're not mere coincidences, but cracks in the code? Could these be clues that we're not living in the real world, but a manufactured one designed to keep us docile, distracted, and in the shadow? In this episode, we dive into the overlap of Gnosticism and simulation hypothesis. We'll explore the opinions and thoughts and the ideas of our guest. We'll look at his perspective of Gnosticism, and we'll explore the development and growth of his podcast, Aeon Byte Radio. In the end, are we prisoners in a digital cage, or are we the architects of our own reality, capable of breaking free if only we awaken to the knowledge of our true nature? The answer, as always, may be out there, hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Welcome, listeners. In this episode, I brought on a host of a podcast that had been one of several that's motivated me to start my own. His has grown into a vast program discussing deep things in a safe and uplifting way, carrying the tradition of open conversation from ancient times, where once people gathered together to speak their minds of grand ideas, from the mundane to the metaphysical, such as in the Adaba in Sumer, or the temple at Karnak, to places like the Agora, where philosophers like Socrates and Aristotle spoke their minds and engaged in dialogue with citizens of ancient Greece. He is the logical legend, a thought titan, pondering sage, and he stands at the doors of the virtual Alexandria. Miguel Conner, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on.
I wanted to talk to you for a little bit because while your show has been an inspiration and it has grown and been around for many years now, I would personally like to get to know you. Could you introduce yourself to me and my audience about the origins and evolutions of your podcast, Aeon Byte Radio?
Well, the origins were kind of organic. I mean, I started all my life. I was sort of, as I call myself, a spiritual hitchhiker. Tried different things, looking for the bigger questions of life. What's behind the veil? Who's in charge? Why is there suffering and death? And so forth. And eventually Gnosticism seemed to answer all my questions. Obviously, no system is perfect. All systems have holes and logical gaps in them. But Gnosticism just seemed to work for me and open new possibilities and expand my consciousness. And as they say, knowledge is power, but if you don't use that knowledge, then there's not much good. That power isn't going to do much. So back before there was even podcasting as you knew it, I wanted to share with the world. I didn't know that much about Gnosticism, so I wasn't going to write a book or even blog. So I said, well, why don't I interview some of the experts? And I joined a network called Free Thought Media. It was mostly atheists, but they were also open to having slots where they could have more scholarly shows, and they accepted my show, and I simply started reaching out to various scholars and experts and researchers, and I was very lucky to be able to get the translators of the Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic Gospels, people like Bart Ehrman, and so forth, and I just kept doing it. It wasn't really, there was no schedule. It was just when I was able to interview somebody, I would just do it and put it on there. Eventually, I went on my own website, and I just kept doing it. Again, I wanted to share with the world, as they say in Alcoholics Anonymous. It's not sobriety unless you share it with somebody. You got to give it away. So I wanted to give it away, and I just kept doing it. And around 2018 or so, late 2018, I decided to go full time, do it weekly, or put out as many shows as I could. And I've been very lucky to keep doing it. There's just always, this universe is made out of information, so therefore there is an endless amount of information. There's an endless amount of takes, angles, and again, new research always comes out, new takes on Gnosticism and hermeticism and all the sort of satellite disciplines that are around it, and I keep doing it.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's true. So far, they've all been really good shows. Lots of wonderful people you talk to. And a lot of the topics you focus on, and you have your guests focus on, are some of the major ideas that have been bouncing around in Gnosticism or Gnostic circles. Because even today, there are a lot of people who are still discussing these ideas, and it continues to be a growing community. And what are some of the key themes or ideas that are the major points for you to explore on your show? I mean, like you focus on the nature of reality or spirituality or the human experience, for example.
Well, I think it's the idea that sort of the Gnostic warning 2,000 years ago that they were mocked for and rejected by Western powers, that the idea that we live in some sort of a simulation that's been coded by some higher beings, that each one of us has a spark of divinity and we're all equal. It's just a matter of what our purpose is and how we're going to share this light with others. The idea that what we were told about Christianity and the truth behind the Bible didn't make sense, and there was another version that made more sense, especially when you look at the book of Genesis, the Garden of Eden, and so forth, and the nature of the gods that have ruled Western society for thousands of years. The idea that there is a divine feminine principle in Christianity and other religions, and all these things just kept me going, and it's been a wonderful and continual discovery.
Yeah, one of the most important things that seems to be true from what I've gathered from your show is that there's this major thread, this major topic that you explore at the intersection of ancient wisdom and modern life. And in that, how do you particularly address, either in your own life or with your show, this intersection of ancient wisdom and modern life? Because that's what that is. It's taking something that's of ancient times, 2,000 years ago, and taking it into today. How do you, or how can we incorporate something like that into modern life?
Well, that's the key, right? There are people who came before us and they had universal truths, they had rituals, they had ideas, and sometimes people think them as old and antiquated. But these things, again, are universal. The quest for man to find his place in the universe and understand what his purpose is. And part of what I've enjoyed doing is sharing these ideas and how they can be applied to the world. I mean, central to Gnosticism is the idea of gnosis, this sort of direct experiential contact and knowledge with a higher form of consciousness and a truer reality. And that is something that everybody, especially today, seems to want, but whether you're even doing it spiritually or intellectually. And these ideas of the Gnostic 2,000 years ago, as dangerous as they were, as anarchist as they were, really do work, and we find them manifesting in a lot of places. For example, Carl Jung and his ideas of depth psychology have a huge foundation on Gnosticism. And Carl Jung is as popular as he was 100 years ago, and it seems even more. It seems his ideas, as I say, they are even more fresh and relevant than ever. The idea of shadow work, synchronicity, complexes, and all that are more relevant than ever, and they do work to heal the psyche, to heal the body, and so forth. I mean, the Gnostics were certainly, people overlooked that the ancient Gnostics were healers. They believed in being able to heal, again, the mind, the soul, even the body. There are many Gnostic spells that we find, and advice and so forth. So it is relevant. And of course, you look at somebody else who was extremely influenced by Gnosticism, Philip K. Dick. His ideas today, again, are very relevant when you think of movies that are based on his work, like Blade Runner, Total Recall, what other movies, Man in the High Castle, and so forth. You realize he was very much predicting where we are today, this technological society. And of course, Dick has influenced a whole generation of filmmakers, authors, and even philosophers. So these ideas make sense. Minority Report, that's the other movie I was forgetting, and that's predictive programming and all that stuff. So these Gnostic ideas do work. And again, there's a whole bunch of modern Gnostics, from Cormac McCarthy to William Burroughs, so many others. So these ancient ideas, even beyond Gnosticism, whether it's Hellenistic philosophy or Tibetan Buddhism, these are people that really went through a lot and mined the psyche and went to the edge of reality, and they are useful today, and probably even more relevant today as we live in a culture that's more and more synthetic, devoid of imagination, and turning its back on any type of history.
Right. So would you find this to be a true statement if we were saying that people are drawing themselves more into the idea or into the realm of imagination more than they were 40 years ago?
I would say so. I mean, the good thing, or the light side of the internet and our digital age, is that this information is more available. So it's a matter of those of us who want to spread that. I mean, we have to understand things like Hinduism and Buddhism were available in like 19th century England during the Victorian period. That's how we got Crowley, Golden Dawn, Theosophy, and all that. But it was a slow drip coming into the United States. You saw it a little bit early 20th century. The Theosophical Society had a footprint. You had the World's Fair where you had some gurus talking, but it slowly came into the world, and it really didn't hit the United States until probably with the beat writers. And those beat writers would influence individuals who I'm writing about, like Elvis Presley or David Bowie and so many others. And then eventually in the 60s with the British invasion and so forth. And these ideas really spread into the American psyche. So, but it was slow. But now with the internet age, we have available all this data and all this work from all these ancients. And we, again, find out how relevant and useful and even important they are.
Well, that would lead me to ask what challenges or opportunities in exploring these transgressives, these crossroads, these esoteric traditions in the contemporary, in modern times, in this modern context. What do you find?
Oh, same challenges as always. Who controls the information? Who controls the words? Who controls the meaning? What are we allowed to say? Censorship. I mean, this has been going on forever, because there's always those in humanity who want to control the narrative, who want to control the very thoughts of the population as they control what they can and can't do or eat and so forth. So we really do have the same challenges that we always have. I guess today you could say, as I said, the internet has a light side, but it also has a shadow side too. It's a world where you can go into a lot of false cul-de-sacs or rabbit holes. It's a world that disconnects you from nature and connecting in a real physical way with other human beings. It can be manipulated by the powers that be and so forth. So, same as it ever was.
Yeah, that's right. We were doing Google searches. Some of the better things related to this topic seem to be 4 or 5 pages deep into the search. It's like Google can minimize or restrict what we are actually seeing right off the bat.
Yeah, I mean, as a Gnostic says, what you're seeing is a lie. You just have to start from the point of view that everything you've been told in your life, from your schools, your churches, even your parents — I used to be a very robotically programmed parent — is all a lie. And you have to almost have to start at ground zero and start breaking away.
Yeah. And with that, I'm curious as to what your view is on the role of storytelling. Basically, storytelling as it relates to mythology to understand deeper truths.
Well, it's essential. I mean, we have to understand that linear thinking or writing is sort of a new human invention. For most of its history, humans really have lived in an image-based, symbolically based mental landscape. And this landscape, I mean, yes, there's great things about writing and logic and all that, but we kind of got away from our image brain, which really connected us not only to nature, but also the world of the imaginal, the world of the archetypes, the collective unconscious, this repository of amazing energies and even magic and ideas. So I think that's, we became, as you say, too left brain, if you would. So going back to the right brain, we go into this more holistic, animistic attitude that can really be a game changer for humanity. As Doctor Who once said in an episode, our souls are not made of atoms, they're made of stories. And that is, I think, the truth. We humans are about stories. That's one of our abilities to survive, to learn, to teach others, is that of narration, of stories. Again, as Philip K. Dick said, since the universe is made up of information, then it can be said that information will save us. And as the Gospel of Philip says, a Gnostic text, the mother of all sins is ignorance. It's what you don't know and what you don't understand. That's what makes you, that's what truly leads you to evil, if you would. Even Carl Jung said, evil is simply not being allowed to tell our stories. That's what we human beings are. And that's what the universe is. So if we get back to this sort of mentality, I like how there's this philosopher, Owen Barfield, and he was one of the Inklings. So he hung out with Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. But he said, when we created language, reality vanished. And the world that we saw was completely changed forever. But he also says we have this trope that ancient man had a very limited language, like, ugh, rock, ugh, fire. But the truth is that the ancient men probably had a more complex language. They had a bigger vocabulary, and it was this mixture of images and words and letters and all that. I mean, the ancient Egyptians, we see hieroglyphics, but they also had a writing. They both had hieroglyphics and writing because they understood this is what powers the mind and expands the consciousness to allow better realities to get there. So we need to expand into the storytelling, and expand our language too, which is one of the the really dark weapons of political correctness, and is that it tries to limit language and only allows what you might say the group thought decides is proper. But when we limit our language, we limit our mind, we limit reality itself. That's why there's in 1984, you've got O'Brien, the big bad guy who ends up torturing Winston, but they're both at the beginning working on a dictionary because Big Brother wants to cut out the dictionary and make the dictionary smaller and smaller every year until humans have this limited vocabulary, and with this limited vocabulary, they can control us completely. So I know I went off on a tangent, but here I am.
No, that's a really good tangent to go off on because you're 100% right. For example, I deal with ADHD, and understanding things that I perceive are usually translated in my mind as signs or symbols. It's like instead of seeing words, my mind imagines pictographs, if that makes sense. And what happens is that when I try to share an idea that is more pictographic in my mind, these kinds of thoughts being deep that they are to somebody who's not familiar with some of the symbology behind an idea, I end up having a harder time explaining something, and that's pretty typical, I guess. Well, this kind of thinking is probably pretty typical amongst people who are more neurodivergent, quote unquote, which I think is actually the normal, and people who can't do this are actually the divergent. But that's a whole different topic for a whole different time. But I can understand the value of the imaginal realm and the importance of the imagination as it applies to our day-to-day experience. What I'm trying to ask you, and that's about Abraxas. And this is some kind of entity that, as far as we know, is a mediator between the highest god and the demiurge. I mean, even people like Carl Jung interpreted the Abraxas as some kind of god that encompasses all opposites, including creation and destruction, and they call it, these symbols, the chicken snake god, right? I mean, it's got like the head of a rooster and this kind of a body of a snake, and there's all these symbols going into this, and it's why I was talking about thinking processes and thought processes and the way people imagine things and try to relate them. And the Abraxas looks exactly like somebody tried to explain several different ideas all at once. And you've spoken about Abraxas before, and I'm curious as to if there's any more information about it. What do you know about this Abraxas, and how does it fit in?
Oh, God. Yeah, there's not much. That's probably why he's so fascinating. That's probably why, as a guest once said, he's an unfinished god that we're working on. And it's hard to say because, again, there's so little. You really start really in the 2nd century with the Gnostic sage Basilides, but we don't have any of his writings, so you have these church fathers quoting him, and the church fathers are contradicting. But Abraxas was basically sort of the one church father said he was the head archon. He was the sort of akin to the Gnostic demiurge, and he ruled over 365 dimensions. That's how layered the universe is. Think of a video game. You got to go up all these gods until you reach the top and fight the final boss, which is Abraxas. And we're at the bottom, and you've got Yahweh, the God of the Hebrew Bible, as the lowest god. So think how powerful the other ones are. But then you have other church fathers saying, no, he is really as the Gnostics called him, the God above God, the font of existence, the ultimate consciousness. And but then you have other texts describing him as some sort of demon, and people invoke him a lot in the magical papyri and the Gnostic spells for different things. There are amulets with Abraxas, and some say these are not even to invoke him, but to have him avoid you, because when you have something that is the all, and that includes fate and everything else, it can be a sanity destroyer. So you want to avoid Abraxas, or at least keep him at bay. And Carl Jung wrote about him in his 8 Sermons to the Dead, which is a classic poem which was about individuation, but he talks about Abraxas as being over everything. He is where everything, there is no separation and everything is one. But again, he is terrifying because most humans, to experience that state of pure oneness, of pure the all, it will melt their sanity. And he appears again, magicians used him throughout time. He appears in Hermann Hesse's novel Damien. Carlos Santana has a cover. And there's a reason for this, because in the 60s, especially in Southern California, a lot of the hippies were reading Hermann Hesse's Damien, where he talks about Abraxas, the symbol of complete individuation and oneness, this complete ultimate power of the universe that's beyond good and evil, light and darkness, and all that. So people like the Beach Boys, Carlos Santana, and many others were really into it, and we're talking about Abraxas. In fact, another one who decided to make his own patron god was Charles Manson. Charles Manson talks a lot about Abraxas, and when you read his wacky theology to the family, he is talking complete Gnosticism to them, complete Abraxas stuff. So it's, weaponized Gnosticism is pretty dangerous. But Abraxas, of course, in classical times had this, as you said, an image of a human torso, a chicken head, a shield, a chariot. He had snake legs, but these things, again, are completely symbolical. That's how the ancients were trying to depict him, because, the chicken head means the dawn, because the rooster calls out to the dawn. The human body means that this is a being that is both heaven and hell, or heaven and earth. Snakes also mean that he's the opposite of the chicken. The chicken is solar. So snakes are lunar. They're magical. They're for the underworld. And the chariot means supremacy, like Apollo riding his chariot, and so forth. So it's all symbolical. So yeah, fascinating God. And even Pete Carroll, the founder of one of the founders of Chaos Magic, said, he chose Baphomet to be their patron god, but Abraxas came in second place.
Sure. Yeah, when you're talking about Abraxas in this way, it reminds me of H.P. Lovecraft, because a lot of his mythos explores ideas like this, ideas of forbidden knowledge and maybe some consequences. And like you said about how Manson had weaponized Gnosticism, well, it's definitely true that any kind of religion that is weaponized is horrifying. And, Lovecraft himself really seems to echo these Gnostic writings or Gnostic warnings about the pursuit of esoteric wisdom. And so how would you look at that? How would you look at H.P. Lovecraft and his portrayal of this forbidden knowledge, comparing Gnostic views on the dangers of enlightenment without understanding?
No, for sure. There's no guarantee you're coming back. There's no guarantee that this knowledge won't destroy you or drive you insane. It's called a risk. It's called the hero's journey. There's it's a risk. You have to take the risk. So, and Lovecraft definitely taps into a lot of that Gnostic sensibility, as scholars have noticed, because in Gnosticism, you have these beings called the Archons, ruled by the Demiurge, and they are these sort of cosmic stellar beings, like the great old ones. and they created the universe. They control fate, but they're sort of in the backdrop. Although the demiurge wants to be worshipped because he's kind of conceited, the other archons are sort of in the background running the machinery of the universe, the simulation. And if you prod too far or you explore too much, because in these Gnostic texts, and same in mystery schools, you have to go either to the underworld or you have to cross this sky, this astrological labyrinth that's controlled by these beings, so you can make contact with Abraxas or the ultimate consciousness or the one of Plato. And there's always risks. If you go through them, you could be destroyed, or if you catch their attention. If you do too much spell work or you're searching, they might stir from the universe and squash you because they don't want you to wake up, and they don't want you to tell other human beings to wake up. So very parallel to Lovecraft. And of course, in Lovecraft's mythology, you have Azathoth, who's the supreme god, but he's just an idiot, which parallels the Gnostic idea of calling the creator god of this universe a childish god, a stupid god, an ignorant god. And there are other parallels too. I mean, Cthulhu is sort of a savior figure. He's the only great old one who's actually he's like half human. He is humanoid, and he sleeps, and he's going to wake up, and so forth. And as someone said, the great old ones maybe just symbolized a very primordial time when we weren't thinking in linear terms, when we didn't have civilization, when we didn't have logic, and they threaten that because they are the forces of chaos. But in a sense, it's almost like we need to go back to these forces of chaos to complete us, because we humans are both, as William Blake said, we are both heaven and hell. We are truly chaos and law. We are shadow and light. And these forces do have some gifts at the end of the day, but there's no guarantees. Again, you want to be a hero, you might get killed in the second act.
It seems to be a good analogy. And that's almost like G.I. Gurdjieff kind of idea, that we are the machines, and that we're just existing here until we wake up.
Yeah, that would be it. I mean, Gurdjieff is certainly influenced by Gnostic thought, idea that we truly are robots. It's not a metaphor. We're food for the moon, and so forth. There's so much on Gurdjieff that's Gnostic. And of course, I don't know if you said H.I. Geiger, when you look at his art, that could be straight out of describing archons in the Gnostic Gospels. But again, as somebody once said, that's the second fall. We fell out of paradise, but now we've fallen into technology. We've become machine, half flesh. And H.I. Geiger does a great way of representing this.
Like me, I use this podcast, Truth and Shadow Podcast, as a way to explore ideas, do research into things that I'm thinking about by talking to people who are in their field, in the topic that I'm interested in. And some of Aeon Byte Radio's episodes are similar to that. And I gained that by listening to your show. And I'm curious, because we all have these episodes that are impactful. These people are impactful, and what they've written is impactful in our lives. And with you, Miguel, if you will, what's the most impactful moment or episode on Aeon Byte that resonated with you the most, or any specific that you would speak about?
For some reason, I go back to, I did a show about a year and a half ago on hermeticism. God, I already forget the guest, Charles, but he's a poet. I've got to get his book out. But it cracked me up because I kept asking him about hermeticism and Gnosticism and all that. And he kept saying, no, you got to go to Parmenides. I go, why? Why Parmenides? Because he said something, and everybody in human history is trying to fill in the gaps. He said, there is the one, there is being and becoming, and that's it. Then everybody from Plato to Heidegger to all the mystics to the philosophers are trying to fill in, well, how does this work, being and becoming and the one? And we're all trying to get there. So I always like to hearken back to that, because sometimes you just need to simplify things. You know, when am I in a state of being and when am I in a state of becoming? Who is Miguel that's always becoming, and who's the Miguel that is pure being? And who is the one? So it's simplified, but I like any shows that really deal with Gnosticism proper, as long as it brings revelations and people can get something useful out of it, their rituals, their philosophies, and so forth.
In today's world, we have the power of modern digital platforms, Facebook, Instagram, etc., to convey our messages. What can be made, or what do you think can be used to spread, I don't know, hidden knowledge or esoteric truths in a way that would resonate with people on a subconscious level?
Make a meme. I'm not even joking, because we're talking about image and storytelling. It's like we've gone back in time, and memes are kind of the hieroglyphics of today. It's a picture, there's a cultural energy that we can relate to a movie, a character, and then there's just a few words, and it makes it such a game-changing thing. So when I put out a meme, I get a lot more views on social than a show or a video that I've made. It's just, it's a good thing, I would say. No, but I guess seriously I go back to Parmenides. It really comes, any answer is the same answer. And that's what the Gnostics were saying. There's a writer in the New York Times says that when he read the Nag Hammadi library, it was like a bunch of sages, mystics, and madmen all talking at one. Because when you read the Nag Hammadi, it is very psychedelic, has this sci-fi sensibility. It's very dreamlike at times. But then he says, but they always call us to know ourselves. And I think that's really the central point of Gnosis is self-knowledge, the old dictum that's written in a temple of Apollo at Delphi, because that's the answer to everything. Is that I always tell people it's always about the inner journey, because all the answers are there. What can you do to go inside, which always entails deprogramming, getting rid of all false information, and just going inside into that place of being where all the knowledge is there, and more important, you know exactly where you need to pivot to, or where you need to go, or what you need to create. And could be a meme. So I always say, know thyself, being and becoming, get down to basics.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Well, one of the things that is pretty common in any kind of philosophy, or religious thought comes these misconceptions or misunderstandings. And there's always some kind of apologetic to answer those and help people understand exactly what it is people are addressing, and so they can hear the reasoned description, the reasoned response to a misconception, and then they can choose to acknowledge, accept, believe, agree, or say, that's not for me. And I'm curious, when we're talking about these esoteric traditions, like your journey, for example, in your journey, you've probably come across these kinds of misunderstandings or misconceptions. And I'm wondering how it is that you, within the realm of Gnosticism, specifically deal with these misunderstandings. What have you found to be true? What have you been able to deal with and handle, etc., in apologetical form?
Well, no, I mean, critical thinking is wonderful. Don't get me wrong. I think technology, the scientific method, logic are so useful, but that's only half of it. But we do need to use them, and we do need to sharpen them. The problem is there's so much bias, whether it's in the scientific community or the philosophical community. It's sometimes even challenging others is it's almost useless. People are just as irrational. It's almost like that saying that goes, some people's salaries depend on them not knowing certain things. I think it was Upton Sinclair who said that, I think, in The Jungle. So that's where we are today, is people don't want, they've been paid off, their salaries depend on it, or they just don't want to see it. And I understand. I don't want to see, I know that I always have blind sides, things I'm not ready to see because it's too painful. My worldview will have to change. And change is hard, but it's almost important. We have to change our worldview and our beliefs. It's not us. We are deeper and bigger than that. But it's hard because, I mean, I don't even try anymore, but then I have tried. I mean, there's individuals like, let's say, Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro or James Lindsay, and I like some of their ideas. I agree with. I like that they use critical thinking on some things, but then I look at their views on Gnosticism and hermeticism, and I go, oh my God, you're nowhere in the realm of logic, or you've twisted the logic, or you haven't studied the history, so you don't know what you're talking about. So once in a while, I'll send them a meme, or I'll write something, but it's maybe like once every 2 months or once a month. I did a show with Gordon White on it, but again, I can only broadcast information, and those are ready and want to listen are fine. I am no expert. I'm no guru. I'm just another guy, but at least I've done my research and I know my history and I know Gnostic thought. But again, and other people probably have that frustration when they're trying to teach others about Thelema or Catholicism or whatever. That's the world we live in.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Wow. Yeah, no, there's a lot of value in the role of skepticism and critical thinking, especially when approaching any kind of intellectual thought or topic. And I have found that Aeon Byte Radio has fostered this sense of community, Miguel. You've done a great job with your guests, and it shows that, your listeners themselves are interested in exploring some of these ideas and looking at these types of spiritual paths. I'm curious how it is that you address the goal of challenging or addressing conventional beliefs.
Well, I always tell people my tagline, write your own gospel, live your own myth. Again, we are all connected to the archetypes, so therefore we're connected to the myths that are in the stars, that are ancient. Myth is the secret language of the soul, and gospel is, you have to find your own version of spirituality and religion. And I leave it kind of obscure, but the key is that you have to find out what works for you. That's probably something that turns people off, because everybody wants a BuzzFeed listicle or a step-by-step guide. And sometimes I do need it when I'm in a place of stress, and I just suspend my disbelief and I act like I'm a follower for a while. But at the end of the day, each one of us is a unique person. As Alan Moore said, each of us has a different spiritual constitution. So what works for you might not work for me. And that's what the Gnostics, you see in their texts. There are different sects of Gnosticism. They all have different rituals. They all have their little lodges spread across the Greco-Roman Empire and later medieval Europe. And each of them has a different group that has different teachings. And some of these groups split when somebody has an insight on how to, make contact with the one, and how to take these astral flights, and how to have self-knowledge, and how to heal your body and your mind. And so it's very different. It's very individualistic. So I go back to the same place I started. Know thyself. What works for you? What is going to make you wake up? What's going to make you expand your consciousness and see behind the simulation, and you have to do the work.
I'm going to just ask a couple of Gnostic questions here because I'm curious. And something I'm curious about is Gnostic cosmology. There's this notion of the divine spark or the divine essence trapped within the material world, and it's seeking liberation or enlightenment. How do you, Miguel, how do you explore the journey of awakening or of gnosis, as it's called? And what do you think your role, or what role do you think your podcast particularly plays in helping listeners navigate their own spiritual quest for higher knowledge and understanding?
Well, I mean, as a podcast, I bring in different individuals with different practices, and some of these go beyond the Gnostics, occultism, Eastern traditions, and so forth. I always try to parallel them to Gnosticism because Gnosticism was extremely influential. Hermeticism, too, on secret societies, modern occultism. And then there's so many parallels between Gnosticism and more of the many of the traditions in the East, like Tibetan Buddhism and Kashmir Shivaism and Advaita Vedanta, because Gnosticism and Hermeticism and many of these traditions fall under the mind model, where everything is mind, and we can use our mind to help us understand the illusion, the Maya that we are and that the world is. So I try to bring guests who have different insights and so forth into it. But again, goes right back to self-knowledge. What works for you? If you just quiet yourself down, you're going to find that your very body will tell you what you need to do, what kind of exercise, what kind of spiritual work you need to do, and you'll find your path, which will lead to your purpose. And again, it's not easy because the archons will try to kick your ass. They'll try to seduce you into your iPhone or sex or drugs, or they'll just simply destroy you or try to destroy your body at some point. They don't want you to wake up, just as your government doesn't want you to wake up and ask too many questions.
Yeah, and cults questions are bad for business. You're right. So how does Miguel, how do you address the challenge? How do you address the challenge for navigating the complexities or the struggle of everyday life within the framework that you find the most true?
Well, again, I try to take the inner journey. I try to understand that this is a world of impermanence, that things will change, that it's not real. Things like the government and society are, well, we're going back to stories, our stories that we tell ourselves. They don't really exist when you think about it. How we act in relationship, again, these are stories. They're in our head. We're not going to go extinct because we change our dating patterns or anything like that. So I try to understand that there is an impermanence that is a simulation, and I continually try to look for something that's more real, more transformative. And at the same time, as we're talking, that everybody has a divine spark and everybody should have the opportunity to wake up and the dignity to live a full life and find their own purpose. I mean, there is a big, you might say, compassion, piety, charity aspect to the classical Gnostics or the Cathars or the Manichaeans too, that we are, as I say, to help the least of our brothers, because as I say, nobody gets out of here until we all get out of here.
There's a figure that appears in a lot of cultures across the world. It's known as the trickster figure, the trickster god. And he's typically a shape-shifting character that challenges basically our norms or our convictions. It's that one entity that blurs the lines between chaos and order. And how do you explore the role of the trickster archetype?
Well, I think it's probably one of the most important deities or archetypes or forces, I think, especially today. The trickster is the big energy or symbol of change. As they say, you can look at Hermes. Hermes is the god of doorways, the god of the crossroads, and same with all these tricksters from, you could say, Hecate and others, and the coyote, and this is the god that will help us transition to whatever is on the other side, which is necessary. In Native American lore, the changer will come and change you whether you like it or not, because that is the nature of reality and that is the nature of existence. And change, our egos may not like it, but there is always an opportunity to it. What's on the other side of the doorway? And you can look at the United States and other countries. We are definitely going through a major change, a major shift. So the trickster god is essential to understand us, to help us go through it, instead of being left behind or having our sanities crack because we resist that change. Obviously, a god like Hermes, who's so essential to Gnosticism and was essential to occultism, the Enlightenment, the founding fathers, all that is a god of that brings gifts, that brings technology, reason, philosophy, because it's all about the idea of what we can do to grow and change. And again, there's always a risk. There are no guarantees, and there's always something is going to die as we leave it behind. So the trickster is important. Again, we look at, we can look at so many mythologies, Loki, Hermes, the coyote, even the Gnostics talk about, when you look at the Gnostics, they really couch some of their protagonists like Jesus and Sophia as tricksters, because a trickster always lives at the edge of civilization. It lives outside the normal order, and it is often, like Loki, it is disliked by the normal order, but it tries to hide and bring the secret information inside this world to disrupt everything, like Loki does, like Hermes does, like Jesus does, not just in the Gnostic text, but in the letters of Paul. Kind of sneak in, give this information that's going to bring the whole thing down and bring permanent change into some sort of new dispensation. So that's the idea of, I think it's so important for the trickster. And you see the trickster manifesting in our modern age in so many places, and I'm amazed people don't see it. You look at somebody like Trump. That's a trickster archetype manifestation, a disruptor, somebody who is outside of politics, and he's coming in and just turning everything upside down. For better or worse, I don't know. Tricksters don't really care about morality. They care about change. You look at cryptocurrency. You look at the pandemic. These mysterious forces that are turning everything upside down, and we wonder, is this a joke? Is this what's on the other side? But I just got to go on this journey and see where it leaves me. So, as I say, this is the age of Hermes.
I mean, that's what happens on the fringes. Things move their way in slowly. And in ancient cultures, it seems like it's the trickster that is the catalyst for this transformation.
It is. It's essential. So it's something, it's a force, an archetype we really should embrace if you want to get to the other side of this transformation with any sort of sanity or life or understanding. I mean, there is no choice. That's the way the cycles of the cosmos go, and we shall see what happens.
Oh, right. Well, as we began the show, I'd asked you about the origins and the evolutions of Aeon Byte Radio, your podcast. And now I'm curious as to what some of your future direction or future goals are for your show, Miguel.
I don't really have one. I just keep doing what I'm doing. Again, it's an endless well of information. I suppose I'm leaning more on videos, but I think I've been working so hard on this Elvis book, this spiritual biography of Elvis that shows a side that nobody's ever seen, and now I'm working on a book about David Bowie, and I'm just realizing, or I kind of knew it because I was called to write these books, that both really tap into the Gnostic trickster hermetic vibe, and both have lessons that the world hasn't seen or are more useful than ever.
Oh, right. Yeah, definitely David Bowie's definitely a trickster of some kind. There is definitely that kind of energy associated with him. And then you bring up Elvis as some kind of hidden mystic. Can you talk about, well, your book comes out in 2025. I can see that early next year, early in 2025. Could you go ahead and talk about that?
Well, Elvis was certainly, I think people forget how historically changing he was. When he came on into the 50s, everything changed. We were coming out of World War II. This country was becoming this mighty, militaristic, space-age empire. It was a time of wealth, but it was also a time of a very conservative time. And when Elvis came, everything got turned upside down. Moralities got changed. How women acted changed. Women found their sexuality because of Elvis. Technology changed. The way Elvis exploited TV and radio. How we consume media changed. How our fashion changed. How we understood how he opened this doorway of African American music and later on Hispanic and Italian music. He changed the game like any good trickster would do. And this continued until, he opened the door for the 60s. What did John Lennon say? Before Elvis, there was nothing. It's like something woke up, and David Bowie was the same. David Bowie was... Elvis and Little Richard basically gave him his desire to become an artist and understand that he could create innovative stuff. And I have so much of this in the book over and over because rock and roll at its core is just gospel music, and that's what it is. It's shamanistic gospel music. And you see it with Johnny Cash, Little Richard, Elvis. All these guys were just copying the big tent revivals and turning it into this electronic music. Why? Because we had this huge materialistic empire. Rock music was this sort of spiritual buffer to help us go into what? This new age, this new American empire. It carried us. It helped our psyches. And who was leading this change? Elvis, of course. Just like Bowie in the 70s, we forget, what was glam rock? Glam rock was when people were disillusioned with the 60s, right? The 60s had kind of not done anything. We were still having wars. People were still materialistic. Suddenly you had the Rolling Stones and Altamont, which was a disaster. You had Charles Manson, which showed us the dark side of the hippie movement. Nothing had changed, right? So what came up? Glam rock, which is very similar to rock and roll, except instead of spirituality was science fiction, came out as this buffer to get us out of the 60s into the 70s. And later, glam rock became punk, new romantic, new wave. And who led that? David Bowie. And the more I study, the more I realize David Bowie and Elvis are like the same character. Over and over. In fact, they knew each other. And Elvis asked Bowie to produce one of his albums, but unfortunately he passed away. The song Golden Years? Bowie wrote it for Elvis. So, yeah. So, it's just, there's this trickster mentality. And, again, my Elvis book comes out next year. I've got 300 pages of this, and now I'm working on the Bowie one. But Elvis was a hugely spiritual guy. He was into Yogananda. He was into Blavatsky and Theosophy. He was into Manly P. Hall, Hermeticism, Kabbalah. He was into all this stuff, except most people didn't want to look at it. And it's all there. Again, it's not, there's a lot of Elvis controversy and conspiracies out there. He was like the tabloid king, but this is directly from his family, his friends, many eyewitnesses that saw him. He had, like Bowie, he had UFO encounters many times. He had Again, Bowie's the same way. He could astral travel. He had magical powers. So, yeah. Sorry, man. We've missed these tricksters that are so important today.
Yeah, one of my favorite movies is The Labyrinth, and David Bowie's character, the Goblin King, as the meme goes, was a far better babysitter than Sarah.
The debate continues. Yes, I've had that debate with my family before. Yes, we keep having that argument every year.
Well, I've looked at, when I was looking at Laurel Canyon and figures like Charles Manson and Frank Zappa and, Frank Zappa and the Freaks. And I mean, there's definitely some kind of something there, maybe even something darker than just a trickster going on there. What do you think?
Yeah, everything casts a shadow. Every movement, the Catholic Church has a big shadow. Gnosticism, you have a shadow, I have a shadow. So, of course, the 60s movement would have a shadow, too. And even Jung said the bigger the light, the bigger the shadow. So these movements, there is a shadow side to them. And then as, what's the old saying? Every great cause starts as a movement, turns into a business, and degenerates into a racket. So, of course, that would happen into the 60s, right? People got to make money. We got to hire HR. Some people get addicted to the power or the drugs that, we want to control people. So that happened. And again, that's, again, it was only natural something like that was going to happen. That's why John Lennon was so about, he learned in the 70s, he wasn't going to join a cause. He was only going to join something for a few months and leave because he understood how these human organizations were going to go.
So as we are getting near the end of my episode here, what I would like to do, I would like to ask, where can listeners find you? Obviously, we've been talking about your podcast, but do you have anything else?
My website, thegodabovegod.com, or type in Aeon Byte on your address bar, and you'll find there my website has books, news, podcasts, videos. It's all there for whatever you need, articles, short videos, you name it.
Yeah, I'd actually recommend, honestly, anybody who's looking at, some of these Gnostic topics for their own personal research to check out Aeon Byte Radio, definitely. Miguel, I really want to thank you for taking your time and talking to me for the show. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
But I can only show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it.